I've read this book called The Hobbit. The Hobbit is written by J.R.R. Tolkien, who also wrote The Lord of the Rings. This book takes place 40 years before The Lord of the Rings, so some of the characters who participate in this book also participates in The Lord of the Rings. And I mean, I could talk for ages about the summary and everything, but I suppose you know the book already. Everyone does. So I'm gonna talk about some of the things happening, like you already know them. But I hope it's okay. The main character of the book is called Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo is probably the most dynamic character you'll ever find in any story. Anyways, hobbits is a race, and the hobbit race is related to men, as you know, people, human. They have a cheerful countenance, and they have brown curly hair. The hobbits' special talents is their oversized feet, which are very hairy. That makes them able to walk around barely making any noise, so they always like sneak around. Hobbits are really conservative, and they eat 6 meals a day, and they really do enjoy smoking pipeweed. So when Gandalf in the beginning of the story comes with the dwarves to pick Bilbo up to take him with him on their quest, Bilbo doesn't want to go. But in the end, they end up persuading him. And already after a week in the adventure, he's put behind him his handkerchief, and against his will, he only eats 2 to 3 meals a day, and he's actually moved out of the Hobbit town, which is quite unusual for a Hobbit. In the first half of the book, it's clear to everyone that a Hobbit isn't used to adventures. He walks around cowardly and seems useless and helpless in most situations. For instance, he needs to be carried on the back on one of the dwarves when they flee from the goblins in the caves. But in the caves, he finds a ring. And that's not just a ring, it's a special ring. It's the ring. I could talk for ages about the ring and its curses and its powers, but most of those things doesn't play a big role in this book. First in the Lord of the Rings. So what is important to know about the ring is that it makes you invisible when you wear it, and you get a special relationship to it, almost like a desire. And what the ring does to Bilbo is that it boosts his confidence. It first comes to show in the haunted forest of Mirkwood. Here Bilbo avoids getting caught by the spiders like dwarves do, but instead he fights them and frees his friends. Afterwards, when the dwarves are taken as prisoners by the elves in the forest, he frees them again. This is also where the dwarves realize what Bilbo actually is capable of. When Gandalf in the beginning of the story said, "There is a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself," Thorin, who is the leader dwarf and the leader of the adventure, didn't believe him. But after the Battle of the Five Armies, Thorin is convinced. Bilbo is a hero. Bilbo was the one who brought the different races together to fight their shared enemy, the goblins. And right before Thorin dies, he says to Bilbo, there is more in you of good than you know." The narrator of The Hobbit is quite interesting. It is an omniscient narrator, but I don't really think that omniscient covers what the narrator actually is capable of. I mean, the narrator knows everything, and the narrator can read all types of the runes, speak all languages, he can go back in time and tell the ancient story of the different races. So in some way it almost sounds professorial when you read the book. The narrator knows the thoughts of even the most complex characters like Bilbo and Gollum and the dragon Smaug. And the narrator knows what will happen in the future. And the best way to explain that is actually to read it out. I'm gonna read from page 156 in chapter 8, and we are in the middle of Mirkwood Forest. It was not very long before he discovered, but that belongs to the next chapter, and the beginning of another adventure in which the Hobbit again showed his usefulness. The narrator knows what will happen and tells us, the readers, that he will explain it to us soon so we understand what will go on. There is no I in The Hobbit, but there's quite a lot of you, where he refers to me as the reader of the story. Tolkien cares so much about his readers that when the story gets a little bit too complex, the narrator takes time to explain it to you. The narrator jumps out of the plot for a bit and gives you the knowledge and information you will need to understand what will happen next. One of the funniest things about the narrator is that he actually doesn't know anything. Everything. he can read the mind of Gandalf. For instance, when the goblins joins the Battle of the Five Armies, everyone is surprised. But here is written, how much Gandalf knew cannot be said. So Gandalf is a wizard who is so powerful that even an omniscient narrator can read your mind. That's really amazing. But that probably says more about Gandalf than it says about the narrator. There's a lot of symbols in The Hobbit, but I will talk about two of them. I'll talk about the ring, and the sword used by Gandalf, Thorin, and Bilbo. The ring symbolizes the corruption of wealth and power. A parallel can be drawn to the Arkenstone, which has about the same impact on Thorin as the ring does on its bearers. Gollum is the most clear example. Bilbo would be if I could talk about the next 3 books as well, but to keep it to The Hobbit, I'll use Gollum as my example. Gollum was originally a wealthy hobbit named Smeagol, who lived a nice and normal life. But when he found the ring and got the feeling for it, his desires for his precious ring rose. He forgot about his friends and began to just follow his desires for the ring, and he journeyed beneath the mountains to be alone with his precious, which led to him living a miserable life. It also changes people's mind and drives them insane. It makes them evil in some way, which is what happened to Thorin by the power of the Arkenstone, in the Battle of the Five Armies, of course. Bilbo is a nice contrast to it, though. He seems uninterested in the treasure, and he can wear the ring without being consumed by either vanity or jealousy. Another great symbol of is the sword used by Thorin, Gandalf, and Bilbo in the end. Thorin and Gandalf finds 2 swords in the Goblin Caves, which are named Orcrist and Glamdring. When a sword has a name, it means it is either a powerful sword or a powerful man once used it or is using it. Anyways, it symbolizes something heroic. To provide a perspective, we can look at King Arthur's sword Excalibur, or Arya Stark from Game of Thrones' sword called Needle. It emphasizes that the one carrying the sword is a person of great powers. So when Bilbo decides to name his sword Sting, after he kills the spiders, it symbolizes his bravery and initiative, and it's a great step in his way of becoming a hero. Okay, The Hobbit is a classical fantasy book with classic themes. There is, of course, the good versus the evil theme, but come on, that's always the theme of fantasy books, so that's not interesting. Now, the main theme of The Hobbit is actually the development of the protagonist, and the way he develops into a hero. Throughout all the events that happen, Bilbo discovers more about himself, and he develops from being a boring, common hobbit to being one of the greatest heroes of the Middle-earth. The story is built up kinda like a fairy tale with this quest which has to be done, so I guess you can say that it's the theme as well. But since the quest is used to develop Bilbo, I'd rather say that the development of the protagonist is the main theme. Another theme is the power of fellowships and cooperation, because Bilbo wouldn't have been able to do what he did without the help of the dwarves, and vice versa. So the lesson that you need to work together is also a strong and clear theme to me. Another theme to be pointed out is the use of power, and how you can use power in either good or in bad ways. Gandalf is probably the most powerful character in the story, and he always uses his power wise and with curiousness. He doesn't throw spells and curses around him like they were nothing. But when Thorin becomes the king of Under the Mountain, it shows all the bad things that power and strength can do to people. Anyways, that was my review of The Hobbit. I really hope you enjoyed watching it. I found it really difficult to shorten it down to keep it under the 10 minutes, because I just think there's so much to tell. The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings is just, Tolkien created this whole universe, so, just about the universe you could talk for hours. So I think it was really hard to choose out what was important and what wasn't, but I hope it shows right, and I hope you understood what I said. And yeah, I just hope you enjoyed it.